thanks everyone for tuning in here to this awesome session. I'm so looking forward to it's this team who built the Somebody podcast filed more than 80 FOIAs. And I don't know if you've listened to this podcast, but it is amazing and stellar. So I highly suggest you do. And so they're all going to break down how they did this. We've got Alison Flowers, Sam Stecklow, Shapearl Wells, and Bill Healy. So I'm going to put myself off camera and let you all take it from there.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. I'm Alison. I am one of the producers of Somebody, and I am the Director of Investigations at the Invisible Institute. Quickly, I will introduce my colleagues a little bit further. We have Sam, who is also a reporter with the podcast and manages our FOIA practice at the Invisible Institute as a reporter and producer there. Bill Healy, who is a producer on Somebody, and Shapearl Wells, who is the host of Somebody and the main subject and narrator and investigator and all sorts of other roles and hats that that you wore, Shapearl, in the making of this podcast, which was really initially an investigation that later turned into a podcast. So for those who aren't familiar, I'll just quickly read a little blurb about the podcast that we use in describing it. When Shapearl Wells' son, Courtney, is found outside a Chicago police station with a fatal bullet wound, Shapearl immediately distrusts the official narrative. So she launches her own investigation into her son's murder and teams up with journalists from the Invisible Institute to confront the cops and find the truth about Courtney's death. Somebody explores the racial disparities and turbulent relationship between law enforcement and citizens in one of America's largest cities. And we co-produce this podcast with Topic Studios, The Intercept, and iHeartRadio was our distributor. The podcast was very successful in terms of public recognition. We received the Third Coast Award, Scripps Howard, IDA Documentary Award, Headliner Award, Ellie Gracie for Shapearl, which is a Women in Media Award. Shapearl was also Adweek's Podcast Host of the Year, which is a huge, huge award. And the podcast was a finalist for a Pulitzer Prize in audio reporting. So we're incredibly proud of it. And it also spurred impact in the city. It prompted a 2-year Inspector General's investigation, which has recently produced a summary report that we're hoping to learn more about soon. But from what we can tell, it involves disciplinary action and policy change recommendations for how CPD handled Shapearl's son, Courtney. So we're going to hear from Shapearl because this is really her story. I want to open, though, by listening to one of the first FOIAs that we filed in this case and kind of like what we got back in that. And this is coming from the night that Courtney died. So Kristen or Bill, we're looking for the hospital and Cicero police clip. Is that handy?
Oh, sorry, I was playing it. I thought you could hear it.
I was not able to hear it. Did other people hear it?
Okay. Try again. This way. Tell me if you can hear it now.
Hey, Bill, is it because you have your headphones in?
It might be.
An hour after he posted on Snapchat, my son was being rushed to the hospital.
All I am calling because I just received a patient here to our ER.
The hospital called the police in Cicero, where I live.
Okay. And what's the name of this gentleman?
His name is Courtney Copeland, Copeland.
And you want his mom advised that he's in the hospital?
Yes. He was actually en route to, I guess, a police station nearby because he had been shot, and then he came in by ambulance. I don't know if you want to tell her what the nature of the injury is yet.
Nah, probably not. Probably don't want to. Just that he's injured in the hospital.
So this isn't just a recording. This was happening in real time, in real life to Shapearl. And when they're like, hey, do you want to tell her? They're talking about you, Shapearl. So, I think a lot of times journalists forget that type of thing because it isn't, affecting their lives in the same way. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about what it feels like to listen to this and when you listen to it for the first time?
Hey, Shapearl,
We
you're
can't
on
hear
mute. Shapearl, you're on mute. You have to unmute yourself there. No, you're still on mute. There's an icon there's 5 icons below your video there, and the one in the middle. Can you click the icon in the middle right below you on the
I think she's trying. It's probably not working. Are you trying and it's not working, Shapearl?
Do you want to log off and maybe try log back in? Sorry about that.
Okay, can you hear me now?
I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Yes, I was hitting the mic and microphone. But Alison, your question was basically,
Yeah. How does it feel? How does it feel to listen to that, knowing that they're talking about you? And this is more than just a records request. This is your real life.
it was a difficult moment. It really was, because of the fact that when they arrived, they already knew what was going on with my son, and they withheld that information from me. I do understand why they would have, but I think, me personally, in hindsight, think that I would want to know when they knocked on the door.
And that information being that Courtney was already deceased, of course. So, in the early days after Courtney died and in the midst of your grief, you somehow had the presence of mind to put together a file, and you started collecting documents, which is, what a journalist does when they're investigating a case. So can you tell us a little bit more about what you discovered in those early days?
Well, I would say one of the best pieces of advice that I got was to actually write down what was being told to me and what I was thinking, as well as what evidence I was gathering on my own. Because my friend Santita told me that in the beginning, you always get the truth. And so in that first meeting, after I was notified that my son had been murdered, questions were asked of me, like who owned his vehicle? Did he really own the vehicle? Who else could be registered to this car? And so for me, it automatically sparked suspicion. So I began to dig a little deeper in trying to figure out what happened to Courtney. And so as reports trickled in, I found that, he had been indeed handcuffed. And although I knew this information, I sat on this information for a while, just trying to uncover more about what happened that night.
And you discovered that he was handcuffed in some Chicago Fire Department documents. You had heard rumors at the hospital from some people there on the ground, but it was actually in some of the paramedics' records that you saw that he was handcuffed, that it was noted that he was violent and combative, and that was just not any part of what had been shared with you to that point. So tell us what led you to the Invisible Institute, because you investigated this case really far on your own in that first year after Courtney died. He died in 2016 and we met in 2017. So what happened in that year and what led you to our door?
Well, basically, Alison, I was at my wit's end. I had no other options. I was just sitting there in my bedroom, just totally distraught, not knowing where I could turn for advice, for help, because I had did everything within my own powers to get the answers I needed for Courtney. So I was reading an article in the middle of the night, and it talked about the Invisible Institute and the Laquan McDonald case. So I said to myself, Shapearl, what do you have to lose? Just go ahead and write them, tell them Courtney's story, and see if they respond. And thank God you guys did.
And specifically what you were looking for was the video of Courtney's police encounter. So Courtney, you were told that Courtney was shot in his car, drove around the corner to a nearby police station, the 25th District Police Station, where he flagged down an officer for help. There are a lot of pod cameras around that area, cameras attached to the police station. And so you wanted to see for yourself what happened, because that didn't feel good to you as a Black mother, knowing that your son was shot, died in this police space, right? So you came to
Correct.
us hoping to get the police videos because you were denied them, right?
Correct.
Okay.
And
so that's go ahead, Pearl.
And like I said, when they told the story, it was like Courtney pulled up to Officer Block. He jumped out, grabbed his hand, said, "I'm being shot," and he collapsed. Just that little statement made me suspicious, because I know my son, and I know that he would have been more detailed than that. And then they go on to say that Officer Block told Courtney that the car was still moving. Courtney runs back to the car, put it in park, then runs back to Block and tells him the same thing over again. So that told me that my son was alert. Even though he may have been injured, he still had a high survivability rate if he had been taken directly to the hospital. And so it was not only about seeing the tapes to see if they were involved, but to see what they did or did not do to save Courtney that night.
Right. And why would they be handcuffing a gunshot wound victim? Was
Correct.
a really big question. Were they treating him like a gunshot wound victim, or treating him like a suspect. So they denied Shapearl the videos. This takes us to her reaching out to the Invisible Institute. She emailed us. Sam was the first to speak with her, and he called you. Over the 4 years that we investigated this case together, Sam filed more than 80 FOIA requests. I don't know if that's a record for a project for Sam, but probably not. But Sam, can you tell us what were some of the biggest challenges and obstacles and discoveries that you faced in those 80 plus FOIAs?
I think one of the biggest challenges was with those files that were kind of at the center of what Shapearl wanted, which was the videos. Even when we got the files from CPD, they had provided them to us in this archaic proprietary software format that is only used by law enforcement agencies, and claims that they were not able to convert it. It took us months, weeks, if not months, to figure out how to even play the videos. And even then it was of a poorer quality and not in its native player. So it was not as clear as it could have been. And then the other biggest challenge was just the inadequacy of the police investigation, which had left videos that were from a camera on a charter school across the way from where Courtney would have been shot, that very well could have given us a lot more detail, and they didn't even go and ask. And by the time we went there, their retention policies had deleted the video already. And that's a challenge with audio-visual material in general, is that it takes up more space for these bodies to store, and they keep it for a much shorter period of time. But the greatest—
So actually, Sam,
yeah, mm-hmm.
let me stop you there for a second, because we actually have a clip. We've all dealt with receiving FOIAs back in a format that we don't like or that's difficult, especially when we're talking about multimedia. But again, like this played out in Shapearl's real life. I just want to emphasize that. And we have a clip of Shapearl getting the videos back, getting ready emotionally to see, because it was video, except we were telling an audio story of it, to see her son's final moments, and then the videos won't play. So can we listen to that clip?
Sure. Which one do you want to play? The police
give videos in crazy format. Yeah.
After the Invisible Institute stepped in, all of a sudden, the city had no problems releasing the videos from the night Courtney died. They also released the police radio from that night.
522 Robert.
2522 Robert.
Victim is male. His name is Courtney Copeland. Give me a date of birth of.
It's hard to understand, but if you listen closely, the officer says, "He gave me a date of birth." Then he pauses. "He gave me a date of birth."
Give me a date of birth of.
The detectives at the hospital told me Courtney didn't say anything after he collapsed. But Courtney was talking to them and giving them information. Finally, almost 500 days after my son died, the city sent me a bunch of DVDs in the mail. I truly felt so sick about it because of what I was about to see. I braced myself, and I popped the first one in the player in the bedroom. The disc wouldn't even play because the city sent them in this crazy format, G64, which I've never even heard of. This was going to be the first time I was going to see the final moments of my son. And then for those videos not to play, and they knew that I wouldn't be able to open this format, it's like they were trying to make it impossible for me to find out the truth. But about a week later, the folks from the Invisible Institute were able to convert the footage, and they brought it over to my house.
Hi.
So that's just, Bill will talk about this in a little bit, but that's just sort of one example of how you can kind of sculpt a little bit of a scene out of something as mundane as receiving a FOIA back in a format that doesn't work, right? Sam, what else along the way were some challenges and discoveries?
Yeah, I guess I overestimated how long it took us to get through that encryption, but it was very frustrating. It felt like forever. I think the biggest things that we got, because Shapearl came in with a huge stack of documents already. She had already obtained Courtney's medical records, some fire department run sheets that the hospital had, the whole police physical file, not the audio visual. So in terms of what came back from our FOIAs, that was the most useful. Definitely the contents of the video, once we were able to play it, as I think the most affecting and the most informative. But also, as you kind of heard, the police radio gives not only a lot of color, obviously, that you can use in an audio format, but lots of details that are just not going to be in the reports that get written up later or are generated from whatever is happening, like a OEMC event query. It's just going to have all of the human parts of it, like talking about getting his name from him, that you wouldn't necessarily get otherwise. So I think that was definitely the most useful. And then I think on a separate note, we also learned through FOIA that the one of the main officers who've been on the scene, Sean Ronan, had been involved in a separate shooting that he had been investigated for, I think, shortly after this case. And that was through our work with CPDP and Chicago's police misconduct records. So I think that was also a big find.
Right. And so when you're doing a FOIA and it's for audio or video, there's so much data, in fact, packed into those files that you could never really put in a document. And what Sam was referencing was in the police report, it said that Courtney didn't say anything after he collapsed. Yet we're hearing in the audio dispatch that, in fact, the officer much later is getting Courtney's date of birth from Courtney live when he's on the dispatch. And so he's getting that information from Courtney. So clearly Courtney was speaking. So these are things that we were piecing together. Yet storytelling really requires simplicity and clarity, not a lot of details, which, tons of details in 40 FOIAs, Sam. So when you're filing FOIA after FOIA after FOIA after FOIA, like how do you decide what to file in a case like this? Like are you just following your hunches? Do you have like a protocol, a list of things that you would ask for in any case? How do you kind of figure out what you're hoping to find, other than like what we all as a team decide, like, hey, we need this, we need that? There was a lot that you were just deciding to pull. So walk us through that a little bit.
Sure. So I guess first, specifically with audio, I think it's always helpful to try to think about where that might be held, like what might have been recorded. With police, I think more and more things are recorded just routinely. I don't know that it happens uniformly, but a lot of interviews or interrogations or, even regular or, encounters are recorded on a body cam or something like that. And so that's all audio that can be used. So here, if CPD didn't have the police dispatch, it's not held by CPD. We had to ask the Office of Emergency Management and Communications. So it's just thinking about what other agencies interact with what you're looking into. I think in terms of just the thought process of making FOIAs for a case like this, at first, we just want everything that they will give us, right? Like we don't know what they have to begin with, so we just want the entire case file. It'd be nice if they provided all the audio, video, photos, whatever associated with that. I think for a larger homicide case, they won't initially, and you need to make a good amount of follow-up requests. But again, just thinking about where it might intersect. We knew that fire department ambulances had come out, so we went to the fire department. We knew that it happened at a park that had a lot of schools. We went to CPS. We went to the charter school that was there. Not all of these were successful, obviously, but just trying to chase down any governmental body that might have interacted with it in any way. And also just knowing what bodies are FOIA. Charter schools are fully subject to FOIA. So even if they're like tangentially related to something, it's just a security camera on their campus. That's something that you can FOIA. I think also if you're looking at something that's in a specific location in Chicago, there's surveillance cameras everywhere, and they're run by different agencies. So if you know that there's a CTA station nearby, you can look on Google Maps or just go walk by yourself and see, like, are there security cameras that might have caught what I'm looking into? Obviously, there are tons of pod cameras that Chicago Police has. There's red light cameras that the Department of Transportation runs. So a lot of it is really just mundane and knowing and trying to figure out where things are and calling and asking and a lot of the like shoe leather type things. So I think that applies just as much to FOIA as it does trying to get, source interviews and things like that.
So let's talk about how to turn shoe leather into sound. This is Bill's specialty. Bill and I go back a long time. We were journalism students together at Medill, where he now teaches. He also teaches audio at other places too, and is a former StoryCorps producer. So Bill is really the audio expert in the room here. So tell us, Bill, I mean, one thing you told me about early on is that audio does not handle detail well. I was more of a print reporter, although I had worked in like TV, and I knew how to write simple sentences, but I still struggled with not wanting to like cram in every single detail of every single hard fought reporting FOIA thing that, we had tried to get. So how do you kind of leverage FOIA for sound? And how did we do that in the podcast?
Yeah, I mean, just one thing in terms of details and text versus audio, it becomes so important to kind of direct the listener as to what details they need to be listening to, what are the important things. And there's that term signposting, which is essentially like telling the listener what to pay attention to. And with FOIA, there is usually a reason why you're filing the FOIA, and you have a hunch that something's there, or you believe that something could be there potentially. And I think just simplifying your thinking down to like its most basic, so that it's clear for listeners, for an audience of listeners, is one thing that is really important. Signposting, telling people what to pay attention to, and like Shapearl did in that clip when she said he said this. He was talking to the officers. That's where you're pointing out what you want people to pay attention to. So signposting and I have other thoughts. Can
you talk a little bit about the benefit of narrative audio in terms of sequence and kind of how that works well with FOIA? Because FOIA is a process, and the way we do audio storytelling is also very like processy.
Yeah, I mean, because audio, you listen to it, stories follow sequentially. One thing happens, and then the next thing happens, and the next thing happens, and you're kind of listening and following along to the story. And for that reason, process-oriented things are really good for audio. And when it comes to FOIA, the process of getting the FOIA back, the process of opening the FOIA, the process of all of that stuff is fodder for an audio story. Yeah, I think it's a really good tool in that sense for anything that's happening. Yeah, present tense.
And I think
yeah,
it just like was occurring to me about how audio is so much about conveying emotion rather than detail, of course. And I think for FOIA, we're trying to get information, but are we really talking about like how that information makes us feel, right? For a journalist, it's really exciting to get that information back, right? But Citizens FOIA, Shapearl FOIAs, and like she's getting back devastating details about her son's death, sometimes through us and sometimes through her own records searches. So I think that is one way that audio kind of brings alive the real impacts, the emotional impacts of the FOIA process, is the fact that information can be hard to emotionally digest, in fact.
and
And
with the podcast, one thing that we did was we have a lot of reaction tape where Shapearl is watching the videos and reacting on microphone. Yeah, and that is
play that?
Sure. Yeah, that is where the emotion really comes through most. I'll play that clip. So this is Shapearl with some people from the Invisible Institute and some family members watching for the first time this video of her son outside the police station.
The videos came from 4 different cameras. The main one was in front of the police station. There were also other camera angles from around the block. Remember, it's in the middle of the night. The video is kind of grainy and pretty bad.
Yeah, it's right here. I think I can get you.
This is the police station.
Oh,
right
good.
here.
You can see it. Yeah, the address is in the file name, too.
We see the BMW outside the police station. The car is still running. We can see the smoke coming from the exhaust pipe. There are 2 police cars behind the BMW. Then another one shows up with its lights on. It looks like Courtney's car has been pulled over. But Courtney himself is nowhere in sight. Right then, the camera swings away. But I mean, why would you move the camera here? You know it's something going on over there.
And you can see the lights bouncing off, right? There are cars, right?
Yeah, look at them.
And you can see them increase as a few more cars come in.
We don't even know what's going on. We still can't see where Courtney is or what the police are doing. Finally, a few minutes later, the camera comes back to the scene, but still no Courtney. It looks like his jacket that's there. It was freezing that night. I know Courtney was wearing his pea coat when he was shot. There's a bullet hole in the back. But here it is, crumbled up on the ground. Well, where is he? A police officer is looking through the back window of the BMW with a flashlight. And then the camera pans, and we see Courtney for the first time.
Yeah.
So let's talk about as we're talking about feelings. We all know how it feels to have a FOIA heavily redacted. It's very frustrating, but we actually turned that frustrating FOIA redaction into a scene as well. And Bill, can you talk about just like how editorial that was and kind of what that sounds like?
When you say editorial, what do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, I guess we could go ahead and play the clip. We sort of made a scene out of a redaction, right?
Yes.
Because of the like literal frustrating sound of a redaction in audio.
Yeah. Here's that scene.
So we'll see that. Yeah.
When we asked the city for all the police dispatch in Courtney's case, we got about an hour of tape back. The first 25 minutes had Courtney flagging down Officer Block for help.
Gentleman just said he was shot.
His license plates.
Edward 551790.
His name.
Victim is male. His name is Courtney Copeland.
And Elena calling in.
1 ticket of shots fired at Fullerton and Long and Fullerton. Caller heard 2 shots on the block. I got no description.
But then later in the radio tape, there's this. For 35 minutes. When we asked why this was bleeped out, the city told us, again, that it was unrelated. We pushed back and had to wait months to get the full tape. And when you listen to it, come find out, it's completely related.
Yeah, now that I'm listening to that back, I kind of wish we had let that annoying sound go even longer. You know, I remember us debating like how long should it go, but in truth, it went for 35 real minutes on the call recording. So again, audio is, because of the process of FOIA, audio is a nice way to create scenes out of that process, even for something as mundane as a redaction.
Yeah, and you're feeling along with the journalist how frustrating that is to get back something that's all blacked out and you can't access the material. But feeling that frustration along with the person who's doing the reporting.
So before we leave a little time for questions, I want to end with a sort of a rabbit hole FOIA story that never made it into the podcast, and then also our big lucky break FOIA story. So I'll start with the rabbit hole. Shapearl got kicked off the event here for some reason and is having trouble logging back in. But basically, we learned that of the many cameras that could have yielded footage in this case, the one that would have been the most critical to seeing what happened to Courtney and how he was shot and perhaps by whom, that particular pod camera in the police report said that it had a DVR error. And so we had heard from Courtney's girlfriend that she had seen the morning of after Courtney was shot and killed that she saw police taking that, or I don't know if it was police, but she saw somebody with the city taking the camera down from the post. And so that seemed to line up with this idea that it had a DVR error, which was frustrating because that would have been probably the most beneficial footage. So Sam, tell us what you did to dig into this matter.
We ended up filing a request for the manual for the specific kind of camera that the city had. Ultimately, we weren't able to come to any firm conclusions to include, but we did find that the camera does not need to be taken down to address the DVR error that they said was causing the issue. So it remains an open question why they were taking that camera down, whether or not that DVR issue ever happened. But just another example of being as thorough as you can. Very quickly, we also have been involved in a lawsuit in Colorado to release police certification data. And as part of that, we found that testimony from the state AG's office was not correct because they had testified that the system that they use to store the certification data did not have the capability to produce a spreadsheet, this $2 million software that they bought. So we asked for the bid and what the company had submitted and described that they do. And obviously they can produce a spreadsheet. So if there's something like that where it's a contract with the government or something like that, always just be as thorough as you can.
So speaking of thorough, happy to have you back, Shapearl. We're going to end before we go to questions with this lucky break story of how we found Elena, the witness. So we always knew that there was a woman who called 911 to report shots fired. And we wanted to know, whenever there's a 911 caller, you really want to know more than what they say in that little, brief recording. But we had no way of finding her because her name and everything about her was redacted in the paper report. So how did we end up finding her, Shapearl?
Well, basically, the information was listed in the metadata in the police report log. So it was just by chance, and I always say it was God that led her to us, that allowed us more about what happened before. So I was grateful for her and her husband to be able to identify some key points in that.
Okay, I'm not sure if everyone could hear Shapearl. It was a little spotty for me, but I think what she was trying to convey was that it was actually in the audio recording file, in the metadata for that file, the kind of like jumble of information, there was actually the phone number to, her name is Elena, as we say in the podcast. We were able to reverse phone number, look her up and find her address and find her. She ends up having this really emotional scene with Shapearl outside the police station where Courtney died on an anniversary vigil event. We ended up connecting with her and her husband, who actually remembered a partial license plate of a car that came down their alleyway after those gunshots rang out, that later matched another license plate that someone else reported of some guys throwing a gun out of a car about half an hour later. So that was part of the redaction, the 35-minute redaction of the unrelated case that was actually related because of Elena and that 911 caller. So 2 redactions here ended up being really critically important. One, we were able to push back against an appeal and we got that tape finally. And then the other one, we got through luck through the metadata of finding her phone number. So we did leave like 7 minutes for questions. Maybe Bill, do you want to guide the question process here? I know there might be a couple in the chat. Is that how we're taking questions here? Maybe it is. I don't know
Yeah.
if people are able to talk.
If people can drop their questions in the chat, that'd be great, because they don't have audio access.
Okay, got it. So I see the first one. Will there be a season 2 of Somebody? We don't know. I think we would be open to it. We're also trying to figure out what it means to, while the name Somebody could apply to a lot of different kinds of stories, we think that the way that Shapearl told the story and, a parent or someone telling their own story of their own loss and investigating the case is like a really unique way of telling that story. So that might be another lens through which we want to tell that type of story. So certainly there's a lot of stories that could be told that fall under a Somebody, umbrella, but we might just want to like find that like particular angle.
Yeah, there's this second question in the chat also from Mark. He says, when you produce something like Somebody, are all the episodes created post fact finding and research, or were they done in real time? And yeah, I can answer that, which is just that we were probably 3/4 of the way through the reporting by the time that most of the project came together and the scripting and the audio together. So there was still some reporting to be done, loose ends to tie up, but most of it was not in real time. And Shapearl, someone here named Charles says you're a great storyteller.
Oh, thank you. It was, it was just something that we actually had to, I think it started because I was already recording. So it was kind of natural to keep recording. So that was one of the reasons, because I was planning back for myself so I won't forget facts and important dates and things that people told me. And so that's how it was shaped based on, what I was already doing initially.
Yeah, someone in the chat wants to know about your narration, how that came about. Was it scripted, or did you make it up as you went?
Well, I would say that it was both. Definitely, they pulled a lot of my audio recordings and they turned it into a script. And if it was something that they, ad-libbed about, they would always, would you say it like this, Shapearl? Or how would you say this? And so they would always ask for my feedback on trying to, because they are telling a story as well. So that way,
Oh, Shapearl, I think you accidentally somehow hit the mute button.
Shapearl's mute button. Very glitchy. But we interviewed Shapearl at length. We pulled from her interviews to create scripts. And then in the actual studio, she would change things on the spot and we would kind of, ask her questions and she would respond to us without looking at the script. So it was a combination of a lot of different ways of putting that story together.
And Scott wants to know, was part of the reporting about why the police conducted a non-investigation or only about how the events unfolded?
It was a counter investigation. And so it was that very much centered on what the police didn't do.
Yeah.
And what we were doing. Yeah.
Kristen wants to know how long it took to write the podcast, scripting and then mixing. Good question. I don't know that we have a good answer.
Well, we started working on the very first episode, I want to say in December of 2018. And then the summer of 2019 was really when most of the series came together. And then that fall was when we started kind of doing the fine tuning, and mixing was like kind of fall, winter of 2019, 2020. And it was distributed in March of 2020. Do you remember it that way, guys?
It took a long time. It was not fast.
Okay. 3 years, 3.5 years, 4 years by the time we got to distribution.
For 7 episodes. So
it doesn't have to take that long, but we actually needed that long on the investigation side for some things to manifest.
Yeah. And did we work on other projects while this was going on? Yes, a lot.
Yeah.
Individually, we each had projects going on, investigations, and yeah, Shapearl. What other things were you working on while this project was going on, Shapearl? Can you hear? One thing Shapearl was doing was building up a foundation, which is actually going to have a dinner coming up soon at the experimental station, which you're welcome to buy tickets
to. Copeland Memorials, copelandmemorials.com. You can find the event information. I know that they can only have like 50 people, so it's a limited event. But if you liked the podcast, it'd be a great way to see everyone who was in it. And it's a charity ball at the experimental station, which is where the Invisible Institute is, in the main room there. So Shapearl is actually a professional caterer and event planner, as well as many other things. And so I have no doubt this event is going to be a beautiful celebration of Courtney's life. How did we get Chance the Rapper to do the soundtrack? Chance and Courtney went to high school together, and one of our colleagues as well, one of our colleagues also knows Chance from high school, and asked him about this, and he said that we could kind of pick out whatever song we wanted, and that ended up being a really long legal process, not because Chance wasn't willing to give it to us, but because songs have lots of things in them that have other legal implications, like samples and rights and masters. And so I got a nice lesson in how all of that works. And for future podcast needs, we will be commissioning music, because it's a lot easier. But it was very generous of Chance to give us, let us use that one song as the theme, and I think it really works well.
Yeah, and also I put in the chat a link to this curriculum that we put together. If people know high school students or teachers, it's a great resource for them. It's 10 lesson plans, so it's designed to be a 2-week unit for high school English classrooms, and we're happy to be in touch with people too as we move forward. And I think our time is up, but it says, how did you convert the security cam video? That's a good question. I have FOIA'd and received a similar incomprehensible format that I still have not been able to find a way to convert and view. Can this law be changed?
We had a technologist on staff at the time who was able to figure it out. I think he was able to use some sort of player online and then do like a screen recording of the player or something. I ran into the issue again in a completely unrelated investigation out of St. Louis, And for that, we had to hire a technologist who is in the Chicago area to help us. And his name is Will English. You might want to reach out to Will English. I know he's on Twitter and other places, and he works with journalists sometimes to help them with these challenges. So that is what I would suggest. And Sam, are there any ways to push back against getting things in formats that are inscrutable?
Technically, if they have the ability to provide it in a different format that you ask for, then like technically, short of filing a lawsuit, I don't know if you're gonna get like CPD to do anything like that willingly. I think the law should be strengthened. So if any lawmakers are here.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Shapearl, and everyone else for joining us. Sorry you had so many tech issues, Shapearl, but it was really wonderful to hear you and see you some of the time. And we directed everyone to Copeland Memorials to check out the event if they want to come meet everyone who was in the podcast and learn more about your foundation.
Yeah. Well, that's time. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And thank you, Alison, Sam, Shapearl, and Bill for this awesome presentation. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Okay, take care, everyone.